Hello, I'm Kathryn Britton, one of the editors of Positive Psychology News, and I have with me today Joanna Thompson, who lives now in Sydney, Australia, who's just come out with a book called A to Z, Your Navigator to Success. Okay, and so tell me a little bit about how your book is structured.
Well, that's an interesting question. As you referred to the fact that I'm from London, the title A to Z is the name that we give to the map of London. The A to Z is the colloquial expression for it. So it's divided into 26 chapters, each beginning with a different letter of the alphabet, as you may guess, and it's action-oriented. So in other words, each chapter is structured so that there's a short description of the subject, then there are some action steps to take, and there are ponder points. And these ponder points are designed to be points of reflection.
So could you give us an example of a ponder point?
Well, yes, let me give you an example. This is actually the client. So if we look at Q, the letter Q is quit. Yes, quit. And where this comes from is the fact that, for example, I have perseverance as a key strength, and many of my colleagues in the environment in which I worked tend to have perseverance as a key strength. And then the question is, what is intelligent perseverance? In other words, should we actually assess situations and at some point realise that we should actually be quitting and doing something differently, as opposed to valuing perseverance and keeping going along what may be the wrong path? And this is particularly so in the case of changing environments, which we all know very well. Our operating environments change a lot. So in terms of the ponder points under quit that I'm referring to here, one question would be, what does cutting your losses mean to you? And this has relevance. It's a known thing within the investment world in terms of smart traders know when to cut their losses. You're meant to run your gains, cut your losses. Easy to say, but actually quite hard to do. And the best traders have got that down to a fine art. But then also within our own lives, in many different aspects of our own lives, there's this question, which is sometimes we're so invested in something that we actually lose perspective, and we keep going, because there are all the sunk costs of our efforts, and our dreams and ambitions. And sometimes we need to take stock, step back, and reassess the situation. So that would be an example of a ponder point. And then an action point in the same Q for quit would be specify how you can model best execution of the peak end rule in the coming month. And the peak end rule is something which was devised by Daniel Kahneman. He won a Nobel Prize for it with his colleagues, so obviously a key piece of work. And this refers to the fact that when we look at a situation, we actually remember the peak experience and how things end. And these are the key points to remember about a situation. And the practical application of this is to think, how many endings are there? And there are many in all our client relationships. As often we do a lot of work actually attracting clients and working with new clients, developing client relationships. But obviously there's a right and proper time for those relationships to end. So how do they end? How is it we mark that? And perhaps celebrate the ending, positive ending to a relationship. And then also with my coaching clients, there may be other endings which are not chosen. So for example, when people face retrenchment, redundancy, or with the changing world, their role has to change. There can often be, a pang of regret about all of that. And yet the ending and how things get carried forward matters enormously to people. So clean, sweet endings are actually very important, the way that people move forward. So that's an example.
I had a client who taught me that. He was having to lay off his group of people, and one of the things he did was work with them on how to make sure that they left the company well.
Excellent.
As he put it, you know, you never know who you're going to be working for in the next company. So you don't want to leave somebody behind disappointed with the way you left and then find you're working for them someplace else in a couple of months. So, so interesting point you make there.
It's absolutely right, Kathryn. It's how things are done can be very important as well as what is done. So if we handle retrenchment in one way, we get a much better sense of handover and being able to move on.
So if you were to sort of sketch for me really quickly, there are 26 chapters. Okay,
Yes.
and the 26, could you give me a couple of some of the chapter titles so I get a sense of, you know, what's A and what's Z, for example, in your...
That's a good question, and I should actually mention that the way that it's structured is as a dip-in book. So there's A to Z, but this isn't one of those books where you have to start A and you then work on B, C, D, E. It's possible, and I know many people have actually dipped in. N, for example, is on networking, and a lot of people have found that that's something that's very useful. So A is for authenticity, and Z. Now, the Z was obviously one where there aren't that many things that start with Z. The Z is about Z's for sleep, and this is about healthy sleep and renewal and refreshment through sleep. And there's something that I say in the book, Kathryn, which is sleep is for the smart. And the reason is there's been a lot of work recently by neuroscientists to prove that actually while we're asleep, the brain's actually processing. So that's why it's actually smart to have, one of the reasons why it's actually smart to have sleep, because while we're asleep, our brains are doing masterful things for us.
Well, what you have in your book for J for Joanna and K for Kathryn.
Well, J is judgment. That's and the concept there is how we use judgment and how we discern. So that's J. And then K for Kathryn. Well, K for Kathryn is actually one of my favourites. So K stands for kick off your shoes. And you might think, Kathryn, kick off your shoes? What's Joanna talking about? Well, this is because this was a piece of advice that I received that in fact turned out to be one of the most useful pieces of advice in my career. And so if you imagine this, I was on a 2-day training course, a small number of people. We were very privileged to have a facilitator, and then there were 2 actors, or 2 people in their profession as acting, but they were observers. And so they didn't say a word for 2 days. So a small group of people, 2 days of intense activities, some of them presentational, some of them dialogue, and different sorts of things. And then at the end of the 2 days, we were given feedback on various aspects of our performance. And it was intriguing to me because one of the things that they said to me after all these glowing comments, they said, we've got one piece of advice, kick off your shoes. And I thought, that's interesting. What do you mean by that? And they explained. And I have to say that my initial response was, yes, but it was about bringing all of yourself. I thought, Kathryn, but I am wholehearted in what I do, and I do bring all of myself. What is it you mean exactly? And this is where it was very helpful, because what they said was that in the group activities and various encounters throughout the 2 days, that they'd observed a playfulness and a sense of humour that I have, which they felt was very helpful situation. And then when I stood up and gave the presentations, I had a more formal veneer, and that my warmth and perhaps humour and playfulness didn't come across in the same way. And they said, that's an untapped resource. You're not bringing actually all of yourself. And I have to say that was a real turning point, because I didn't know, so I have to say it's not something I was conscious of. And so it was an external observation that proved to be very useful, because I thought about it and thought, they probably are right. And it gave me a permission to be freer, because perhaps there's an English formality, I have to say. So perhaps I'd sort of compartmentalised in a way that I hadn't realised. And so once I was able to free myself of that, actually it was a great positive influence on my career. So that was why it's quite close to my heart. Kathryn, kick off your shoes.
I'll have to remember that. I'll have to remember to, sometimes I think of it as take off my grown-up clothes, when I get home from some kind of work setting and become more relaxed. Um, so have you got any other favorite letter that you'd like to talk about before we move on?
Well, one of them, and one of the things I have to say, Kathryn, is I've actually asked people, I've had various readers, and I said, oh, choose your top 3 as they flicked through and read the book. And I was wondering, actually, if there would be certain subjects that would appeal to people more than others. And I've been interested to see, actually, they're spread throughout the alphabet. And I think that just proves that there's something in there. There are seasons for everything, so at certain times, something's going to resonate particularly, and at other times it'll be perhaps a different letter. So there's a very broad range of things within the book. But one thing that is close to my heart, which is help. And I've got that H is for help, and that's help with an exclamation mark and help with a question mark. Ooh. And the reason that I have that is because I worked in a pretty hard-nosed environment, and many people might think it would be a dog-eat-dog environment, but in fact it was very cooperative, and as Chris Peterson would always say, people matter. Relationships were very, very important, and I discovered that there are many opportunities to offer help, but Kathryn, that's something that I did naturally, so I felt it was easy for me to offer help, and that's how I like to engage with people. But the other one, which is help question mark. When I first started my career, it was a pretty macho environment. As I said, it's quite hard-nosed. I felt that it wasn't right to ask for help. I thought there was basically, that would be seen as a deficiency. I thought that would be like a chink in my armour. So I was actually rather cautious about asking for help. So on the one hand, I was very willing to offer help, give help, and mentor, and that's something that's close to my heart. But on the other hand, I was cautious about asking for help. And as the years went by, I realised that was absolutely ridiculous. In fact, it's smart to ask for help, and obviously being judicious about it. And the question is it something that you really should be able to figure out for yourself? But I also encountered some very significant examples of very senior people loving to help. And in fact, I then reflected, and this is the journey that I've been on, and perhaps over the past couple of decades, I've realised that I really like to help, and it's not to do with the fact that the person in the corner office doesn't want to help. In fact, very often the person in the corner office has got a sense of recognition of the help that they've received throughout their career. So I think there's a sense of reciprocity, but it goes beyond that. There's also a sense of legacy that people like to be able to help others. So that's why my H, help, is both-sided. So let's not just think about asking for help. Let's also think about offering help and making sure that we work on both sides of that equation.
So be both a giver and a receiver.
Yes.
Because if there are no receivers, then who's going to have a chance to give?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to get back to the book, and I wanted to know, do you have a particular message for your readers out there, the people who might pick up your book?
Well, there are lots and lots of messages in there, and I hope it's packed with a huge number of tips, and they will be very useful to people in different ways. But I think the overarching one that I would like to convey is the fact, if I had to pick one thing, it would be the strengths-based approach to life. And I know, Kathryn, obviously with the character strengths that you edited, this is a subject also very close to your own heart. And this is why my E in my book is for enjoy. And the reason for that is that I hadn't appreciated, and I think many people don't appreciate this, is the fact that enjoyment precedes success. And then wrapped up with success is playing to our strengths. So I see that as a double whammy. So not only do we get to use our strengths, is that we enjoy using our strengths, and then that's the precursor to success. And I think so many people and I would put my hand up here and say, I had probably had that the wrong way round. I imagined that enjoyment was the outcome. And so that's really one of the things that I would like to convey, because we just then have so much more fun.
Have so much fun while we're at it. Okay, I do have one more letter I'd like to ask about, and that's, what did you do for X?
Ah, now that was no, that's a good question, because when I thought about it, I thought, scratch my head time. So this is on my ponder point. It's a picture of someone scratching their head, and my ponder point was X. Now, what is X going to be? Obviously, the choice is somewhat limited for X, but however, X marks the treasure.
Ah.
So I think you'll know from children's X marking the treasure on the map. And this is about finding the treasure within. And the sense there is that very often we can, and this ties in also with authenticity, that very often we lose something of our own essence. So there can be lots of veneers placed on top. And it's getting back to treasure, our strengths, the authentic being, who we really are, and actually working out how we can best deploy that in the world. So that's where X is, which ties in with, and there's a lot of interlinks. So V is for vulnerability. And here again, the work of Brené Brown shows that best leaders, or leaders who are magnetic, do show some vulnerability. There is that human element. We all have vulnerabilities. And this links in with finding the treasure within. It's not denying vulnerability.
Okay.
It's actually understanding that conveying our vulnerability in the right way, in the right circumstances, can actually be very empowering.
Let me ask you one last question, Joanna. Now that the book's available, what's next for you? What's the next destination on your journey?
Well, I can answer that, Kathryn, in two different ways. Destination-wise, I'm planning a trip to explore more of Australia, so that's one of my fun projects and something that I love to do. In terms of the other destination, if you like, my book is something which is helping with my coaching. So I'm working with various clients doing executive and business coaching, and I love seeing the change in people, because one of the things I would say about my book and the action points is that the advice I give is to choose one thing that will make the biggest difference, because otherwise we can become overwhelmed with to-do lists, things we could change, things, and in the end what happens is that we get so overwhelmed, it's rather like that paradox of choice, we end up doing nothing. So it's to choose one thing, but being thoughtful about the thing that can make the biggest difference. So for me, it's continuing my coaching journey, which is something which is very varied and which I love doing.
And in fact, you should tell us the title so that people hear it in your voice.
Okay, in my voice, I would say A to Z, your navigator to success.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kathryn. It's been a great pleasure.